Outlaws target a pregnant waitress, unaware she's a retired sniper instructor. She looked like just another tired waitress working the night shift. Heavily pregnant. Moving slow. Quiet. An easy target for trouble. What the outlaws didn't know. She used to train military snipers. And she hadn't forgotten a single thing. This is the story of how one woman turned the tables, armed with nothing but her instincts, precision, and a quiet kind of rage. Laura Castellanos had been working the morning shift at Ruby's Diner for 3 years. 8 months pregnant, she moved with practiced efficiency between the tables and counter. The regulars knew her rhythm: coffee refills before the cup was empty, orders delivered without fanfare. She spoke when necessary and kept her pass to herself. At 11:47 a.m., the motorcycles announced their arrival. Laura's hand paused as she wiped the counter, her head tilting toward the sound. Her posture shifted slightly, shoulders squaring, breathing slowing to a rhythm learned in places where control meant survival. 5 Harleys pulled into the lot with unnecessary noise. Laura watched through the window as the riders dismounted. They wore leather and denim-like armor, patches declaring allegiances to something called the Iron Wolves MC. The biggest one had arms covered in tattoos and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in months. Old Joe, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee in booth 4, looked up nervously. "Maybe I should stay put," Laura said quietly. Her voice carried an authority that made Joe settle back into his seat without question. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. 5 men, all swagger and menace, scanning the diner like predators evaluating territory. The leader spotted Laura immediately. Well, he said, his voice carrying the roughness of too many cigarettes and too much whiskey. "It looks like we picked the right place to stop." Laura set down her rag and turned to face them. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes changed. Where moments before there had been the tired patience of a waitress near the end of her shift, now there was something else, a cold, calculating awareness that transformed her face entirely. "Welcome to Ruby's," she said. "Booth or counter?" The leader laughed, a sound without humor. "Depends on what's on the menu, sweetheart." His eyes lingered on her pregnant form with an expression that made old Joe's coffee cup rattle against its saucer. The other men spread out behind him, blocking the exit without making it obvious. Standard intimidation tactics. Laura had seen it before. Different uniforms, different languages, same predatory behavior. Her hand moved to the small of her back, an unconscious gesture that might have been stretching a sore muscle if you didn't know that's where she'd once kept a backup piece. "Coffee's fresh," she said. "Pie's good. The menu's on the table." The leader stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell the motor oil and stale beer on his clothes. "What I want isn't on any menu." Laura didn't step back. Didn't flinch. Instead, she studied his face with the detached interest of someone cataloging details for a report. Age approximately 5. Height, 6'2". Weight, maybe 220. Dominant hand right, based on how he wore his rings. Weakness, ego. They always had the same weakness. "Then you're in the wrong place," she said. What happened next would later be dissected by the county sheriff's department and retold in bars across 3 states, but the truth was simpler than the legends that grew around it. It started with coffee. "Pour 5 cups, the leader said, sliding into the center booth. "Make them strong." Laura nodded and moved to the coffee station. Her movements remained calm and professional, but her peripheral vision tracked each man as they settled around the diner. The youngest sat by the window, nervous energy, probably new to the crew. The heaviest took the booth closest to the kitchen, his bulk strategic. The other 2 flanked the entrance. They'd done this before. Whatever this was. As Laura poured coffee, the leader began talking. Loud enough for everyone to hear, crude enough to make decent people uncomfortable. He talked about women he'd known, places he'd been, and things he'd done. The words were meant to establish dominance, to make Laura feel small and afraid. Instead, she calculated angles. The coffee pot in her hand held approximately 2 ounces of liquid heated to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. The distance from the coffee station to the center booth, 12 feet. The approximate time required to close that distance at a sprint, 2.5 seconds. She set the first cup in front of him. His hand covered hers as she pulled away. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" he said. "Depends on the conversation," Laura replied. His grip tightened. "Not painful yet, but promising to be. I like quiet women. They listen better." Old Joe started to stand. Laura caught his eye and shook her head slightly. He sat back down, but his hand moved toward the cell phone on his belt. The leader noticed. "Tell Grandpa there to keep his hands on the table." Laura looked at Joe. "Hands on the table, please." Joe complied, but his jaw worked like he was chewing nails. Laura served the remaining cups, noting how each man held his coffee, how they positioned their bodies, and where they kept their attention. The youngest was watching her face. The heavy one was checking his phone. The two by the door were watching the parking lot. When she finished serving, the leader gestured to the empty space beside him. "Sit." "I'm working," Laura said. "Not anymore." The words carried enough menace to make the air itself feel heavier. Old Joe's breathing quickened. The tension stretched like a wire being drawn tight. Laura considered her options. Compliance would lead to escalation. Predators always escalated when they sensed weakness. Refusal would accelerate the timeline, but it would put her in control of when things went wrong. "No," she said. The simple word hit the diner like a physical force. The leader's expression shifted from amusement to something darker. "What did you say?" "I said no." Laura's voice remained level. "You can finish your coffee and leave, or you can leave now. But you're leaving." The youngest laughed nervously. "Boss, maybe we should shut up." The leader stood slowly, using his height as intimidation. "Lady, I don't think you understand the situation here." Laura's eyes never left his face. "I understand it perfectly." What she understood was this: the confrontation was inevitable. Had been from the moment they walked in. The only variables now were timing and casualties. She'd learned long ago that when violence became unavoidable, the advantage went to whoever moved first. But not yet. First, she needed to isolate the threat. "Would you mind checking something in the back for me?" she asked old Joe. Joe looked confused. "What?" "The delivery that came this morning. Could you make sure it's all there?" Joe's confusion deepened, but something in Laura's tone made him comply. He stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen, his movements careful and deliberate. The leader watched him go, then turned back to Laura. "Smart. Now it's just us." Laura nodded. "Now it's just us." She moved toward the kitchen door, and the leader followed. Exactly as she'd planned. 12 years earlier. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Staff Sergeant Laura Castellanos lay prone on the range. I pressed to the scope. At 600 meters, the target was a white circle against brown earth. Wind speed, negligible. Temperature, steady. Breathing, controlled. "Sight picture?" called the instructor behind her. "Clear." "Range?" 600 meters. "Wind?" "Calm." "Send it." The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 600 meters away, the target sprouted a hole 2 inches from the center. "Adjust and fire again." Second shot, center mass. "Outstanding, Sergeant. Now teach them how you did it." Present day. Ruby's Diner kitchen. Laura moved between the prep stations with the same precision she'd once used on the range. The leader followed her into the narrow space, thinking he was cornering prey. He didn't realize he was walking into a kill zone. "This is better," he said, stepping close enough that his belt buckle almost touched her belly. "More private." Laura's hand closed around the handle of a 10-inch carving knife. Not to use it, not yet, but to know where it was. Situational awareness was a habit drilled into her by instructors who understood that split-second hesitation meant death. "What's your name?" the leader asked. "Laura." "Well, Laura, here's how this is going to work." 8 years earlier. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class Castellanos adjusted her scope for the 100th time that morning. The village below looked peaceful, but intelligence said otherwise. Somewhere in those mud brick buildings, a value target was planning something that would kill American soldiers. "Tango in sight," she reported into her radio. "Confirmed. You are cleared to engage." The shot was clean. 700 meters through a window no bigger than a dinner plate. The target dropped without seeing death coming. Target neutralized. But when they cleared the building, they found more than just the target. They found what the target had been protecting. What he'd been willing to die for. Children. 3 of them, huddled in a back room, eyes wide with terror. The intelligence had been wrong. Or incomplete. Or someone had lied. Laura had pulled the trigger on a father defending his family. Present day. Ruby's Diner kitchen. "You're not listening," the leader said, grabbing her arm. Laura looked down at his hand, then back at his face. "I'm listening." But she wasn't thinking about his words. She was thinking about angles. About the aluminum prep table to her left, the industrial dishwasher to her right, and the service window that provided a clear line of sight to the dining room. She was thinking about the propane tanks for the grill, the electrical panel behind the leader's head, and the fire suppression system overhead. Everything could be a weapon if you understood leverage and force multiplication. "Then you know what comes next," the leader said. Laura nodded. "I know exactly what comes next." 6 years earlier. Walter Reed Army Medical Center. The psychiatrist had kind eyes and a gentle voice. The guilt you're feeling is normal, Sergeant. What happened wasn't your fault. I pulled the trigger. Based on intelligence you were given. Bad intelligence. That doesn't bring them back. No. It doesn't. But it also doesn't make you responsible for their deaths. Laura stared out the window at the courtyard where wounded soldiers learned to walk again. I taught people how to kill. I was good at it. You taught people how to protect their fellow soldiers. That's different. Is it? The psychiatrist leaned forward. What do you want to do now? Laura had thought about that question for months. I want to disappear. Present day. Ruby's diner kitchen. The leader stepped closer, his intentions clear. Laura's body reacted with muscle memory older than conscious thought. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet. Her center of gravity lowered. Her hands found positions that looked defensive but could become offensive in a heartbeat. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. The only mistake, the leader replied, would be thinking you have a choice. Laura's eyes found the service window. In the dining room, she could see his crew growing restless. The youngest was drumming his fingers on the table. The heavy one was watching the kitchen door. The other two were positioning themselves between the booth and the exit. They were preparing for something. Which meant the leader had given them instructions before following her into the kitchen. Which meant this wasn't random harassment. This was planned. How long have you been watching me? Laura asked. The leader smiled. Long enough to know you live alone. Long enough to know you don't have any family coming to check on you. Long enough to know that when you disappear, nobody's going to come looking. Laura nodded slowly. She'd been right about the planning. Wrong about the scope. This wasn't harassment. This was an abduction. Which changed everything. The transition happened in the space between heartbeats. One moment Laura was a pregnant waitress backed into a corner. The next, she was something else entirely. The leader saw the change. His predatory smile faltered as Laura's expression shifted from fear to calculation. He'd seen that look before, in places where looking the wrong way at the wrong person could get you killed. Wait, he started to say. Laura moved. Not away from him, but toward him, closing distance before he could react. Her elbow drove upward, striking the cluster of nerves beneath his armpit. His right arm went numb instantly. As he stumbled backward, her foot swept his legs, sending him crashing into the prep table. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. In the dining room, heads turned. The youngest started to stand, but the heavy one grabbed his arm. Stay put, the heavy one said. Boss can handle one pregnant waitress. In the kitchen, the leader was discovering exactly how wrong that assumption was. Laura had positioned herself between him and the dining room, cutting off his retreat. Her stance was wide, balanced, and ready. The carving knife was in her hand now, held in a grip that spoke of training. You made 3 mistakes, she said, her voice carrying a new authority. First, you assumed I was helpless. Second, you separated from your crew. Third, you cornered someone with nothing left to lose. The leader tried to push himself up from the floor. Laura's foot came down on his wrist, pinning his hand to the tile. Not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to make her point. Stay down. Through the service window, she could see the crew getting agitated. The youngest was half out of his seat. The heavy one was reaching for something under his jacket. Time was running out. Laura grabbed the industrial fire extinguisher from its mount beside the grill. 20 pounds of steel and chemical suppressant. She hefted it like it weighed nothing. Call them off, she told the leader. Go to hell. Laura shrugged. Your choice. She triggered the extinguisher, filling the kitchen with white foam. The leader disappeared in the cloud, coughing and cursing. Laura moved through the chaos like she could see through walls, her movements sure and purposeful. The service window exploded outward as she drove the extinguisher through it. Glass scattered across the dining room floor. The crew scrambled for cover, drawing weapons they'd hoped not to use. Boss. The youngest shouted. Boss, are you okay? No answer from the kitchen except the hiss of settling foam. The heavy one pulled a .38 from his jacket. Check on him. What about her? What about her? She's a pregnant waitress. But as the foam began to clear, they could see into the kitchen. The leader was on the floor, zip-tied with cable from the industrial dishwasher. Unconscious but breathing. Laura was gone. Where the hell? The heavy one began. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the diner in red. In the sudden dimness, shapes moved that shouldn't have been there. Shadows shifted without people to cast them. Stay together, the heavy one commanded. Back to back. They formed a circle in the center of the dining room, weapons drawn, trying to watch every direction at once. The red emergency lights created 1,000 hiding places, turning every booth and table into potential cover. Something metal clinked against the floor near the counter. They spun toward the sound, fingers tight on triggers. Nothing there. Another sound from the kitchen. Pots and pans shifting. "She's trying to get out the back," the youngest whispered. "No," said a voice from the darkness. "I'm not." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The building's acoustics, designed to contain the noise of a busy restaurant, now worked against them. Sound bounced off tile and steel, creating echoes that made the location impossible to determine. A coffee cup shattered near the window. They pivoted, guns tracking toward the sound. Empty air. "This is psychological warfare," the heavy one said, but his voice carried less confidence than his words. "She's trying to spook us." "It's working," the youngest muttered. In the red-lit darkness, none of them saw the small objects being placed around the room. Improvised devices made from kitchen supplies and maintenance equipment. Laura had learned to work with what was available, to turn any environment into a tactical advantage. The first smoke grenade, made from flour and cooking oil in a coffee can, detonated near the entrance. Thick, choking smoke filled the air. The second went off by the counter. The third is by the back booths. In seconds, the diner was a maze of smoke and shadow, red light, and confusion. The crew fired blindly, their shots echoing off walls and shattering glass. "Cease fire," the heavy one shouted. "Cease fire. You're hitting each other." But in the chaos, his authority meant nothing. Fear had taken over. They were shooting at ghosts, at their own shadows, and at the sound of their own footsteps. When the smoke began to clear, 2 of them were down. Not dead, Laura didn't kill unless she had to, but unconscious, taken down by precise strikes to pressure points they never saw coming. The heavy one and the youngest stood back to back in the center of the room, weapons pointed in all directions. "Show yourself," the heavy one yelled. "I'm right here," Laura said. She stood behind the counter, clearly visible in the emergency lighting. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with smoke, but her posture was calm. Professional. In her hands was a rifle that hadn't been there moments before. Old Joe's hunting rifle, kept in the office for emergencies. She'd modified it somehow. The scope gleamed red in the emergency lighting, and additional equipment was mounted along the barrel. "You have 30 seconds to leave," she said. The heavy one laughed, but it sounded forced. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing. 25 seconds. The youngest looked around at his unconscious crew members, at the destruction, and at the pregnant waitress who'd somehow become the most dangerous person in the room. "Maybe we should go," he said quietly. "We don't run from 20 seconds. A red dot appeared on the heavy one's chest. He looked down at it, then back at Laura. She hadn't moved the rifle. Hadn't even appeared to aim it. "Laser sight," she said conversationally. "Effective range, 800 meters. Current range, 20 feet. At this distance, I could put a round through a quarter. Or through the center of your aorta. Your choice." 15 seconds. The youngest was already moving toward the door. "Come on, man. This is over." The heavy one's pride warred with his survival instinct. Pride had kept him alive in prison. Pride had built his reputation on the street. 10 seconds. Survival instinct won. They ran. Laura stood in the wreckage of Ruby's diner, still holding the modified hunting rifle. The red emergency lights cast everything in the color of blood, but her breathing was steady, controlled. She'd learned long ago that adrenaline was a tool, not a master. Outside, engines roared to life. The surviving crew members were fleeing, their motorcycles screaming into the desert night. But Laura knew they wouldn't go far. Men like that didn't handle humiliation well. They'd regroup, call for backup, and come back with superior numbers and firepower. She had maybe 20 minutes before they returned. 20 minutes to turn Alltown Diner into something the army would have called a prepared defensive position. Laura moved through the building with mechanical efficiency. First priority, intelligence. She checked the pockets of the unconscious men, finding cell phones, weapons, and identification. The Iron Wolves MC wasn't just a motorcycle club, they were involved in trafficking. Drugs, weapons, and worse things. The leader's phone showed recent calls to someone named Razor. Text messages revealed the truth, they hadn't stumbled across Laura by accident. Someone had told them about the pregnant waitress who lived alone, worked alone, and had no family to miss her when she disappeared. Laura's jaw tightened. She'd been targeted specifically. Which meant someone had been watching her for weeks, maybe months, gathering information, planning. Second priority, fortification. The diner's layout was actually defensible if you understood sightlines and fields of fire. Large windows provided visibility but also vulnerability. Laura dragged tables and chairs to create barriers, turning the customer seating area into a series of defensive positions. The kitchen became her command center. From there, she could see the entire dining room through the service window while maintaining cover. The rear exit provided an escape route if needed, though Laura had no intention of running. She'd run once before. From the army, from the guilt, from the memories. Running hadn't solved anything. Third priority, weapons and ammunition. Old Joe's hunting rifle was a .3006 with a decent scope, but it only held 5 rounds. Laura found 2 boxes of ammunition in the office safe, along with something unexpected, a Colt .45 pistol and 3 magazines. Joe had been more prepared than she'd given him credit for. Fourth priority, communication. The landline was dead, cut, most likely, before the crew had entered the diner. Cell service was spotty this far out in the desert, but Laura managed to get enough signal to send a text message to Sheriff Morrison, trouble at Ruby's. Send backup. She didn't wait for a response. In her experience, backup was something you hoped for but didn't count on. By the time she finished her preparations, headlights were visible on the horizon. More than 5 this time. Many more. Laura positioned herself at the kitchen service window and adjusted the rifle's scope. At 400 meters, she could see them clearly, a convoy of motorcycles and pickup trucks. At least 15 men, probably more. They stopped just outside effective small arms range and set up their own positions. Professional. Someone among them had military experience. A voice called across the desert, amplified by a bullhorn. Lady. We know you're in there. Come out now, and nobody else gets hurt. Laura didn't respond. Instead, she studied their positions through the scope. They'd formed a perimeter around the diner, but it was too wide for their numbers. Gaps in coverage. Overlapping fields of fire that could be turned against them. The voice came again. You've got 5 minutes to come out. After that, we come in. Laura finally responded, her voice carrying clearly in the desert air. Counteroffer. You have 30 seconds to leave before I start shooting. Laughter from the perimeter. Someone shouted something crude about pregnant women. Laura settled into firing position. Eye to scope. Breathing controlled. Heartbeat steady. Time's up, she said quietly. The first shot took out the headlight of the lead truck. The second shattered the windshield of a motorcycle. The third put a round through the engine block of another truck. She wasn't shooting to kill. Not yet. But she was demonstrating capability, range, and accuracy. The laughter stopped. Return fire erupted from multiple positions, but it was poorly coordinated. Muzzle flashes lit up the desert like a deadly fireworks show, but most of the rounds went high or wide. They were shooting at shadows, suppressing an enemy they couldn't see. Laura had disappeared from the service window before their first shots arrived. She moved through the diner like a ghost, appearing at windows, taking calculated shots, then vanishing again before return fire could find her. Each shot served a purpose. Disable a vehicle. Destroy a weapon. Force the enemy to move to less advantageous positions. This was what she taught her students: patience, precision, and psychological warfare. Make the enemy afraid of shadows. Make them jump at sounds. Make them waste ammunition shooting at ghosts. 20 minutes into the engagement, half their vehicles were disabled and several men were wounded. Not killed, Laura was still being careful about that, but hurt badly enough to need medical attention. The bullhorn crackled again. God damn it, lady. Who the hell are you? Laura considered the question. Who was she? A pregnant waitress trying to start over? A former soldier carrying too much guilt? A woman who'd learned to kill and was trying to learn how to live? Maybe she was all of those things. I'm the wrong person to mess with, she called back. A new voice came over the bullhorn. Older. More controlled. My name is Razor. I lead this charter. We can end this right now if you just walk away. No, Laura replied. You walk away. That's not going to happen. You hurt my people. Your people tried to hurt me first. A pause. Then, are you military? Laura didn't answer. You move like military. Shoot like the military. Fight like military. Another pause. What branch? Still no answer. Doesn't matter. You're outnumbered 15-1. You're pregnant. You're trapped. This only ends one way. Laura adjusted her scope and put a round through the bullhorn, cutting off Razor's words mid-sentence. Then she waited. In her experience, men like Razor had 2 weaknesses: ego and impatience. He demonstrated both in the last 5 minutes. Now he'd make a mistake, and she'd be ready for it. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, a coordinated assault that showed real tactical knowledge. But Laura had been watching, learning their patterns, and predicting their movements. She'd placed improvised claymore mines, kitchen equipment packed with nails and ball bearings, at the most likely approach routes. When they detonated, the assault dissolved into chaos and screaming. More wounded. Still no dead, but the math was changing. Razor's advantage in numbers was becoming meaningless if his people were too injured to fight. Fall back. Razor's voice, no longer amplified. Fall back and regroup. Laura watched through the scope as they dragged their wounded to safety. She could have killed half of them during the retreat, but she held her fire. She was trying to end this without becoming the person she used to be. But as the minutes ticked by, as Razor's voice carried across the desert organizing another assault, Laura began to accept an uncomfortable truth. Some situations could only be resolved one way. Sheriff Tom Morrison arrived at mile marker 47 to find a war zone. Disabled vehicles scattered across the desert. Wounded men receiving medical attention behind makeshift barriers. The smell of gunpowder and smoke was heavy in the air. And in the center of it all, Ruby's diner, looking like it had been through an artillery barrage. Morrison had been sheriff of this county for 23 years. He'd seen bar fights, domestic disputes, drug deals gone wrong, and every other kind of violence that small desert towns attracted. But this was different. This was professional. What's the situation? He asked Deputy Martinez, who'd arrived 10 minutes earlier. The biker gang tried to take the diner. The waitress fought back. It's been going on for over an hour. Morrison studied the scene through binoculars. One waitress did all this? That's what they're saying. Where's the waitress now? Still inside. Won't come out. Won't surrender. Morrison lowered the binoculars. Something about this felt familiar, but he couldn't place what. A man approached from the biker perimeter. Big, bearded, wearing leather and attitude like armor. This would be Razor. You're the sheriff? I am. You're trespassing and engaged in armed assault. Your town's got a problem, Sheriff. That woman in there is a killer. According to whom? According to the 15 men she shot, stabbed, or blown up in the last hour. Morrison looked around at the wounded. I see a lot of injured people. I don't see any dead ones. Give her time. Here's what I see, Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in law enforcement. I see a motorcycle gang that attacked a pregnant woman in her place of work. I see property damage, weapons violations, and enough evidence to put you all away for a very long time. Razor stepped closer, trying to use his size as intimidation. Sheriff, you don't understand the situation here. Then explain it. That woman is military. Special operations, maybe. She's turned that diner into a fortress, and she's picking us off like we're targets on a range. Morrison felt something click into place. Military. Special operations. A pregnant waitress who lived alone and never talked about her past. What's her name? He asked. Laura something. Castellanos, I think. Morrison's blood went cold. He knew that name. Not from police reports or incident files, but from somewhere else. Somewhere he'd hoped never to think about again. Deputy Martinez, he called. Set up a perimeter. Keep everyone back. Yes, sir. What about the standoff? I'll handle it. Morrison walked toward the diner alone, his hands visible and empty. At 50 meters, a voice called out from inside. That's far enough, Sheriff. Laura, it's Tom Morrison. We met 3 years ago when you first came to town. I remember. I need to talk to you. Talk. Morrison stopped where he was. Speaking across 50 meters of open ground wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I know who you are, he said. Silence from the diner. I served in Iraq. Second tour, 2007. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. Sergeant First Class Castellanos. They called you the Ghost. Still silence. You saved my unit outside Fallujah. The sniper team had us pinned down for 6 hours. Command couldn't get air support and couldn't get armor through. Then you showed up. Morrison's voice carried across the desert, reaching not just Laura but everyone within earshot. 1,200 meters. Moving target. Wind gusting to 20 knots. You put 3 rounds through a window the size of a dinner plate and ended a 6-hour firefight in 30 seconds. Inside the diner, Laura closed her eyes. She remembered Fallujah. Remembered the desperate radio calls, the coordinates, the impossible shot through a sandstorm. She remembered the silence that followed, then the voices of soldiers who thought they were going to die. After that, Morrison continued, word got around. The Ghost instructor. Best sniper teacher in the army. They said you could put a bullet through a keyhole at 1,000 meters. They said you never missed. I missed it once, Laura called back. It mattered. Morrison nodded, though she couldn't see him. He'd heard stories about Afghanistan, about the incident that ended her career. Friendly fire based on bad intelligence. Children caught in the crossfire. The kind of mistake that destroyed good soldiers from the inside out. Laura, I need you to listen to me. Those men out there, they're not soldiers. They're criminals. Human traffickers. The FBI's been tracking them for months. I know what they are. Then you know they can't be allowed to leave. The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Morrison was giving her permission. More than that, he was asking her to do what needed to be done. I'm not that person anymore, Laura said. Maybe not. But sometimes the person we used to be is exactly who the world needs. In the diner, Laura looked down at her hands. Steady hands that had once ended lives at impossible distances. Hands that now carried new life, that had learned to pour coffee and serve pie instead of dealing death. But outside, Razor was organizing his people for another assault. And this time, they weren't planning to take prisoners. Sheriff, Laura said. Get your people back. Way back. Laura, I said get back. Morrison heard something in her voice that made his blood freeze. The same tone he'd heard outside Fallujah, when death spoke through a radio with perfect calm. He ran. What happened next lasted 17 minutes. Sheriff Morrison had barely reached his perimeter when the shooting started. Not the sporadic firefight of before, but something methodical. Precise. Each shot carefully placed, deliberately timed. Laura had stopped playing defense. From her position in the kitchen, she had perfect visibility of the entire battle space. The hunting rifle had become an extension of her will, each round finding its target with surgical precision. Vehicle tires. Engine blocks. Fuel tanks that erupted in controlled fires, cutting off escape routes without killing anyone. But the bikers had learned too. They moved in coordinated teams now, using cover and concealment, suppressing fire, and tactical movement. Someone among them definitely had military training. The difference was that Laura had taught people with military training. She appeared at windows they hadn't expected, took shots from angles they hadn't covered, and disappeared before return fire could reach her. She used the diner's acoustics to make her voice seem to come from everywhere at once, calling out their positions, describing their movements, and making them understand they were fighting someone who could see everything. Razor, she called across the desert. Your man at 2 o'clock just moved to the red truck. The one behind the boulder thinks he's hidden. The kid by the motorcycle is about to do something stupid. As if summoned by her words, the young biker broke from cover, sprinting toward the diner's front entrance. Laura's shot took his legs out from under him 20 feet from the door. Not a killing shot, but he wouldn't be walking for months. Told you, she said. Razor's voice came back, strained with frustration. What do you want? I want you to leave. Can't do that. Then this keeps going until there's no one left to keep it going. The truth of that statement settled over the battlefield like dust. Laura had demonstrated she could hit anyone, anywhere, anytime she chose. The only reason half of Razor's people were still breathing was because she was choosing not to kill them. But choices could change. You don't understand, Razor called. We can't just walk away. Too much money is involved. Too many people are depending on us. Laura adjusted her scope, studying his position through the crosshairs. What people? The girls. The cargo. It's worth millions. Laura's finger found the trigger. Cargo. They were talking about human beings like merchandise. The next shot wasn't aimed at equipment. Razor screamed as the bullet shattered his knee, dropping him behind his makeshift barrier. Around him, his people froze in terror. The rules had just changed. Anyone else want to discuss cargo? Laura's voice carried deadly calm across the desert. No one answered. Good. New rules. You have 60 seconds to load your wounded and get out of my county. Anyone still here after that gets the same treatment as your boss. You can't, someone started to shout. The second shot silenced him. Another knee. Another screaming biker learning the cost of defiance. 50 seconds. The retreat became a rout. Wounded men were dragged to vehicles, engines roared to life, and the Iron Wolves MC fled into the desert night with their tail between their legs. Laura watched through the scope until the last tail light disappeared, then set the rifle aside and slumped against the kitchen wall. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She was still sitting there when Sheriff Morrison entered through the back door 20 minutes later. Laura? In here. Morrison found her on the kitchen floor, back against the prep table, looking like any other pregnant woman who'd had a difficult day. Except for the rifle beside her and the smell of gunpowder in her hair. Are you hurt? No. The baby? Laura's hand went to her belly. Fine. Active, actually. Think all the excitement got him worked up. Morrison sat down across from her, his back against Thek in freezer. Two tired people in a destroyed kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. Him? Morrison asked. Boy. Due next month. Got a name picked out? David. After my father. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, Morrison's deputies were processing the scene, taking photos, and collecting evidence. The FBI would want a full report on the Iron Wolves' activities. What happens now? Laura asked. Now? Now you were the victim of an attempted kidnapping who defended herself. Everything else is details for the lawyers to sort out. And the shooting? What shooting? As far as I can tell, a motorcycle gang tried to assault a pregnant woman and got their asses handed to them by superior tactics and marksmanship. There is nothing illegal about defending yourself on your own property. Laura managed a small smile. Is that your official report? That's my official report. More silence. Then Morrison asked the question Laura had been dreading. Are you planning to stay? Laura looked around the destroyed kitchen. Bullet holes in the walls, smoke stains on the ceiling, broken glass everywhere. It would take weeks to repair the damage, assuming Ruby would even want to reopen. Don't know. It might be time to move on again. Or, said a voice from the doorway, it might be time to stop running. They turned to see old Joe, still shaky but standing. He'd emerged from the back storage room where he'd been hiding during the firefight. Joe, Laura said. Are you okay? Better than okay. I'm impressed as hell. Joe looked around the ruined kitchen. Ruby's been wanting to sell this place for 2 years. Kept saying she was too old to run a diner anymore. What's your point, Joe? Morrison asked. My point is maybe it's time for new management. Someone who can handle the rough customers. Laura shook her head. Joe, I can't. Course you can. You've been running this place better than Ruby ever did, and you just proved you can handle anything that comes through that door. Morrison was nodding. He's got a point. This county could use someone with your skills. Someone who understands how to deal with problems before they become bigger problems. Laura looked at both men, then at her hands. Still steady. Still capable. But capable of more than just destruction now. I'd need help, she said finally. Someone to watch the place when the baby comes. Joe grinned. I know a kid lives down the road. I've been looking for work. Good boy. Smart. Respectful. Military family? Army brat. Father was special forces before he retired. The kid's been asking about learning to shoot. Laura almost smiled. What's his name? Tommy. Tommy Morrison. Laura looked at the sheriff, who was suddenly very interested in his boots. Your son? My nephew, actually. But I raised him after his parents died. Good kid. Could use some direction. Laura stood slowly, her hand on the small of her back. Through the service window, she could see the dining room. Broken furniture, shattered glass, the detritus of violence. But also something else, potential. She walked to the front door and looked out at the desert. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Beautiful country. Hard country. The kind of place where people minded their own business and helped their neighbors when trouble came calling. The kind of place where a woman could start over. Where a child could grow up safe. Laura flipped the closed sign to open, then turned back to Morrison and Joe. I'll need that sign fixed, she said. And we're going to need better coffee. This stuff tastes like motor oil. Joe laughed. Yes, ma'am. Morrison stood and adjusted his hat. I'll have my deputies help with the cleanup. And I'll make sure word gets around about what happened here. Doubt you'll have any more trouble from drifters looking for easy marks. Probably not, Laura agreed. As the sheriff headed for the door, he paused. Laura? That shot you made outside Fallujah. The one that saved my unit? Yeah? I never got to say thank you. Laura nodded. You just did. After Morrison left, Laura and Joe stood in the ruins of Ruby's diner, watching the sun rise over the Arizona desert. In a few hours, the first customers would arrive, expecting coffee and breakfast and the kind of normalcy that town diners provided. They'd get all of that. And if trouble ever walked through the door again, it would find something it didn't expect. A pregnant waitress with steady hands and nothing left to lose. But also something it couldn't expect, a woman who'd learned that some things were worth protecting, no matter the cost. That sometimes the best way to honor the lives you'd taken was to protect the lives you could save. That redemption wasn't about forgetting who you used to be, but about choosing who you wanted to become. Laura Castellanos, former staff sergeant, former ghost instructor, former killer, poured herself a cup of the terrible coffee and began planning how to make a diner into a home. Outside, Tommy Morrison was walking up the road, his young face curious about the damaged building and the beautiful woman standing in the doorway. Laura smiled and flipped the sign one more time. Open for business.